Yeah, well, when we think about the life sciences industry, it's been in rough shape for the last about 2 years, and I think we had the IPO peak back in early 2021, and since then it's been rough. Capital's been hard to get. It's hard to go public for companies. There's been some consolidation going on, but companies have made progress in their programs. So, if you think about it, they've made progress, they've shown things that work. Theoretically, the value should go up, right? But that's not what's happened. So do investors see opportunities and really great values out there right now? What is your sense of what investors are seeing when you talk to them?
Great to be back with you, John. First of all, you're bang on, and I want to fully agree with you, as I'm sure most life science CEOs that are in the micro cap, sort of sub 100 million market cap sector that we are in would also feel and acknowledge. It has been a very difficult market all the way since the start of last year, 2022. I believe that the statistic in the sub 100 million market cap sector was the entire sector was down at least 50% last year. So that means your share price is down by half, your company value is down by half, and when you have those circumstances, it is more challenging to raise capital, for sure. You have a sort of a downtrending sector. Allarity itself was down substantially more last year and into the start of this year than the sector on average, but we're also carried by that sector momentum. I think that it is and has been and will be for some time a difficult time for companies in our position and for Allarity to really raise the bigger chunks of capital that you can raise in a stronger market. When you can raise the capital that you need for 2 or 3 years and get some peace of mind, right? There seem to be a lot of reports out in the market and discussions that companies that were sort of lucky enough to be sitting on a big cash pile at the start of last year are conserving it, and companies that were unlucky to go into the start of last year with not a lot of cash on hand, which was the case with Allarity, have had a challenging year of trying to stay in business and move forward and raise more money. And you've certainly seen as an analyst a lot of week-to-week companies that are running out of cash. And
well, what's gonna get us out of the funk? I guess that's kind of probably a big question that people have. I was looking at M&A trends last week, and we're actually up in the number of M&A. I didn't add the deal value, but I think we're up, I think, by about 2x over the prior year, maybe 3x over the prior year in terms of number of M&A transactions. Do you think that's one of the drivers, or if not, what do you think is going to get us back on track with investors recognizing the value that's in the small cap life sciences space?
I think with respect to M&A, John, that clearly M&A, you always get an uptick there when you've got tight capital markets and you have companies that are struggling to raise enough new capital to go on independently. So I do think part of that uptick is the ongoing number of companies that are struggling to get enough new capital to move on by themselves. And of course, you don't want to take two struggling companies and put them together, because then you have double the struggle with no capital. So I think some of these successful M&As are being driven by either one side of that is coming to the merger with a substantial amount of capital on hand, but they need good drug programs, or you have a situation where the two companies are able to bring in some institutional investors that will put in the next round for the combined company. What I have heard and seen, I try to stay on top of this every week, like every other CEO. What I read about where our market is going, and talk to my banking advisors, our expectation, I think, like everyone, is it's going to continue to be a difficult year. The recent banking crisis with Silicon Valley Bank, which we talked a bit about, certainly hasn't helped. It's caused more turbulence in the sector.
Yeah, it's messed up the access to capital by quite a bit.
Yes, yeah. I think it's gonna. I think these macro forces, as folks in the market like to say, things that are beyond my control as a as a microcap CEO that are at play in the markets in the world are going to continue to make this a difficult difficult year. But at Allarity, we're dedicated, energetic team. We have a great group of external advisors and bankers, and we're doing our best and staying optimistic that we can find the path forward.
What areas of oncology are there interest in? You know, when we think of the big biopharmaceutical companies, where are they looking now for new cancer drugs?
That to my eye, John, is clearly what it always has been. I think that a lot of the larger investors, and certainly even strategic investors like the big pharma that can deploy a lot of cash, are always interested and remain interested in new drug targets, novel mechanisms of action, right? First in man studies, which are, of course, the highest risk when you're putting a new drug untested before into patients. But the potential, let's call it first to market of those type of drugs makes those attractive for capital deployment. It's higher risk, but it's higher reward, and I see that is where a lot of the money is going. Also into combinations for sure, mm-hmm. and into immune checkpoint inhibitors. Immuno-oncology remains very hot. It's drawing a lot of funding into new inhibitors in that space, and then things like antibody drug conjugates, where you're right. You're able to better target your drug to the tumor you're trying to kill.
Right. Yeah, I think there was that Seagen deal that was in that space, wasn't there? You mentioned Silicon Valley Bank, and obviously that's been a big deal recently. We had a couple banks go down, and there was some concern, I guess, for a while that since Silicon Valley Bank had such a large exposure to the life sciences and tech space, that some of those companies might not be able to meet payroll. The feds came in and made sure that didn't happen, which was quite good. But do you think though that that might affect things going forward? Because SVB did fill a rather important niche there in the tech and life sciences space. You think that'll affect things going forward, or are there others that'll step in to fill the void?
I'm no life science banking expert, John. In fact, even the Silicon Valley Bank, I read to have an understanding of it, but I'm not deeply immersed in. I think the key issue there was the larger institutional investors in the tech space and in our space, life sciences, including a lot of the big venture capital groups. Either they themselves had their capital on account at Silicon Valley Bank, and or when they were deploying their cash by investing into technology companies and life science companies, those companies were doing their banking with Silicon Valley. So to the extent that the bank had gone under and not been rescued, and a few $1 billion of cash kind of went bye-bye, we would have seen a lot of companies in our space probably going bankrupt, unable to make payroll, and also the investment money would have been lost, the investor money, so less capital would be available to come into two companies like Allarity. So it was a very good thing in the end that the feds and the banks have come in to solve that problem. That being said, I think the turbulence that it's caused, maybe the fear, for lack of a better term, in the banking sector is going to, I think, continue to have some ripple effect throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah. You had mentioned, or we had talked about COVID having an impact on clinical trials. And I think COVID also really impacted the FDA and the regulatory authorities, which is obviously a very important thing for a development stage company, because you rely on them to advance your clinical trials. Have you seen any change in the FDA in terms of the way they respond? I think a lot of drugs were delayed. The FDA was focused on COVID vaccines, right? Probably rightly so, and they didn't have time to perhaps attend to all of the new drug applications that had come through. Have you seen a change in the FDA, and are they more responsive, or any thoughts on how the regulatory environment has changed? compared to a year or two ago?
Really interesting question, John. I don't think, Allarity ourselves have seen any real shift there because we're not actively in regulatory dialogue right now on a program such as we were when we had filed our new drug application for davitinib back when it was our lead program, and we were advancing our davitinib companion diagnostic in the device division with a PMA filing, which we talked about earlier. So we were in much more of an active dialogue at that time. Now we're sort of more just in the middle of running our clinical programs. I do think that the FDA, like all regulatory agencies, whether it's drug applications or some other type of thing, have a huge workload. There's always a backlog there,
Sure,
and the agency itself was no doubt impacted by COVID with having staff sick and out and in quarantine like that over the past few years. And then just the shift of things that we talked about earlier, like Project Optimus, where
Right.
The agency is definitely pushing towards a modernized drug development paradigm in which you don't just give patients the maximum drug that they can tolerate without having really serious adverse events. We want to look at, can we actually give them less than the maximum tolerated dose and still get the same patient benefit?
We talked about this in an earlier segment about artificial intelligence. It's really playing a huge role in society, and it seems to be accelerating faster than we can keep up with it. How do you think AI will change the drug development space in the future?
There certainly, John, is an increased amount of activity in our space and probably more broadly other areas of therapeutic development as well outside of oncology to use advanced computing techniques, or what is being termed as AI, artificial intelligence, which some people call machine learning, the idea that the computer is getting smarter as it goes and is able to begin to sort of make certain correlations itself, the way that folks often talk about your smartphone when you use a voice recognition program and it's able to learn the intonation or accent of your specific voice. So the next time that you do it, it sort of knows
for automation. Yeah, that's like the automation side of thing. Yeah.
I think the place that it will continue to have the biggest impact is going to be, as we talked about, in preclinical drug design and drug lead optimization, where, as we talked about, you're going through potentially millions of different drug structures. You want to take a look at advanced computing of how those drug structures interact with the target you're trying to hit, how they might interact with targets you're not trying to hit. And the advanced computers and or AI can and is very helpful in that context.
Yeah, when there's just large amounts of information that humans couldn't possibly, wrap their minds around. So the AI is helping us in that respect. Another area that I think is interesting, and I guess in some way DRP is kind of doing this, but helping enroll trials, and maybe not in the way you're doing it, but maybe in the way of there's a hospital or a clinical site, and there are all these patients coming in, and it's really I think a lot of clinical trials are populated by a physician having a patient, and they see there's an appropriate mix there. However, I think some other AI has been used to screen all of those doctor-patient interactions and take it out of the decision of the physician to push it along and say, hey, this patient might be a good match. That's another interesting way that I think AI might work. Does that complement what you're doing at all, or is that kind of outside the scope of what you think you could do?
Yes, and first to the first part of what you said, John, you're absolutely right. There's no doubt that there's a lot of work going on and a lot of optimism that we could use more advanced computers, more advanced computer learning techniques to sort through a huge amount of data that for many commentators, for example, could just be if we ever sequence the entire genome of every patient, right? I mean, that's millions of data points, for a patient times millions of patients. and this, some refer to this as, big data, the idea of we need advanced computing techniques to sort through that stuff, with the idea that out of all those biological data points coming from different patients, whether before their treatment, after their treatment, whether they're tracked 5 years later, can we tease out from that, signatures or biomarkers that could help us better treat patients? That's definitely going to be a big area. I don't myself think of it as AI, because again, the idea that the machine is learning is the way that your voice recognition software does on your phone, is a very different thing from just having powerful computers that are sorting through a lot of data.
Yeah.
With respect to DRP, our system does that as well. We use some advanced computing techniques to sort through a pretty large amount of data. As we talked about, a given cancer cell has about 25,000 expressed genes at any time. That's a big amount of information right there. And in our system, we only look at genes that are expressed, because genes that get expressed go on to become proteins or enzymes that are doing something important in the cell. Genes that aren't expressed, the ones that are silent or quiescent, not activated, which is a very large amount of information, is something that some people are looking at. We don't do that in our system. And once we use our system to create and then do what we call validate our specific DRP, the score is sort of locked. So, for example, one of our drug-specific DRP companion diagnostics has about 58 expressed genes within it. There are 58 biomarkers that comprise that signature. Once we start using that in clinic and go out onto market, it's just sort of locked. So there's no real machine learning step at that point. You just use what predicts or doesn't predict.
One quick question I got, and I think we only have a minute or two left, but you're making me think, you had this combination trial with davitinib and stenoparib, and I would assume that, I guess, the DRP for the combination would be quite different from the individual DRP for stenoparib by itself or davitinib by itself. Is that right? So you have to rerun it, I guess, or are there certain elements that are shared?
It's a great question, and the answer and the way it works, John, is that when we have a combination study, and this is the first one that we've started, so we're going to learn a lot as we go through. We will be using the two DRPs, one for each drug, right? We have a DRP companion diagnostic that's predictive for stenoparib, and a separate one that's predictive for davitinib, and we will be looking at whether those the use of both of those diagnostics has a superior prediction for the patients that respond than using only one of the two alone, right? If that makes sense to you.
Okay.
So there is also always the possibility that there is so much synergy between the two drugs themselves that you have such a superior patient benefit that it washes out, as we say, the additional power or additional benefit that
you may even be able to lower the score, perhaps, I guess, so it would capture a greater number of.
It can go down, it can go up. It's possible that only one of the DRPs is sort of necessary to use for the optimum benefit as opposed to both. So we'll be looking very closely at that, design the study that way. And ultimately, if we have good phase 1b results and we move into the phase 2 study, where we begin looking at the efficacy signal for the drug, we'll be getting much deeper information on the value of the DRP.
Great. Well, Jim, thanks so much for this conversation. I always enjoy the open conversation at the end, where we touch on a lot of different things about the industry and also with Allarity specifically. So thank you.
Likewise, John. It's great to speak to you as always.
All right. I'll do it again. Take care, Jim. We have Jim Cullem, CEO of Allarity Therapeutics, ticker symbol ALLR.